all of time and space. Everywhere and anywhere, every star that ever was. Where do you want to start?
Hello and welcome to All of Time and Space. I'm Mark.
And I'm Ian.
So this is episode 1, so you may not know of me or Ian from our previous podcasts. Ian, would you want to fill the listeners in on what you've done previously?
Why not? This won't take very long. I do a sort of comedy section or segment for the Doctor Who show called the A to Z of Doctor Who,
Which is
where
hilarious.
I basically, well, thank you. I recycle about 4 or 5 jokes and 2 or 3 dismal impressions to increasingly diminishing returns. But I'm still very proud of my Sylvester McCoy. I used to do a podcast called 5 Minute Fiction, which was reviewing a different book every week. But much more than making and recording podcasts, I'm an avid listener to podcasts, and I've listened to virtually every Doctor Who podcast there's ever been.
And there are quite a few.
Oh, yes.
And now there's one more, thanks to us. Well, in terms of my own podcasting history, I have a show called Nerdology UK, which is still going. I started that in 2012, and we cover all sorts of cool pop culture things. So Doctor Who's cropped up quite a few times, but we cover books, movies, all sorts of stuff. So that's an ongoing thing. And I also used to be on a show that is sadly no more, which is called the Blue Box Podcast with J.R. Southall and Simon Brett and Lee Rawlings. And that's now transformed into something called Strangers in Space. And they still tackle Doctor Who plus lots of other cool stuff too. So that's kind of where you may have heard us before.
That's what we've done before. That's where we come from. What's the big idea behind this new show that we're doing?
Well, it's not necessarily that original, and there are lots of other people who are doing the same sort of thing, but I have been wanting to do a rewatch of Doctor Who from An Unearthly Child right the way up to the present date for quite some time, and I keep putting it off, and really with the whole way the world's going, with the whole COVID-19 crisis and what have you, it's kind of made me realise that perhaps it's better to just get on and do things if you really want to do them rather than putting them off for another day because you don't know what's around the corner. So that kind of made me want to do it. And, well, I thought, I'm going to be at this for a while. I need someone who is a good chap and fun to podcast with. So I collared the boy Ian Martin to be a co-host.
Oh, I guess everyone else didn't answer when you phoned them, right?
Well, there was that as well, but
yeah, I figured. Well, I'm very excited about this.
You've not seen that much of the old black and white stuff, have you?
I have not. I never really felt the need to go back from kind of where I started watching it in the fag end of the Tom Baker era. So this, I've seen a few of the obvious big classics, but beyond that, this is a whole new uncharted territory for me, and I'm very much looking forward to being led by the hand through you as we skip merrily through the 1960s.
Well, that's something I quite enjoy when I listen to other podcasts. You'll have usually someone who's quite familiar with it, and then you might have someone who hasn't watched a great deal of the stuff they're going to go through. And I find that really interesting because you're seeing a whole new take on something that you're quite familiar with, and you're getting to hear it through someone else's experience and seeing it with a whole new, fresh perspective. So I'm really looking forward to that. So yeah, that's what it's all about. The other thing I really love with podcasting, which I'm hoping will be something we can really get going, is the whole sort of community aspect of it. I've really enjoyed several Doctor Who shows, and to an extent on my own show as well, where we have regular listeners who like to get involved and send in their thoughts on what we're talking about. And I'm hoping with the advent of things like BritBox, where the availability of a lot of the older stuff is now a lot more easy to get your hands on, I think it would be nice if you've got other people who are in the same boat who have decided they're going to do the whole rewatch. If they get in touch, and it'd be fun to get some of their experiences as well.
Absolutely. I can't wait. I really hope we get lots of people joining us on this epic voyage.
Anyway, that's enough about us. We'll be back with our first guest after this trailer.
Have you ever thought what it's like to be wanderers in the fourth dimension?
Let me get this straight. A thing that looks like a police box standing in a junkyard. It can move anywhere in time and space.
Susan and I are cut off from our own planet, without friends or protection.
I feel frightened, as if we're about to interfere in something that is best left alone.
You say we've gone back in time.
Yes, quite so.
Time doesn't go round and round in circles. You can't get on and off whenever you like in the past or the future.
Point is, it's happened.
Yes, it has. But it's impossible to accept.
Feeling just now as if we were being watched. Ian, I'm frightened.
Take them to the Cave of Skulls.
I will kill us all in the end.
It is time he died.
To all intents and purposes, we're going to die.
And now it's time to welcome our guest. It's the Doctor himself, Dr. Matt Barber.
Oh, God.
Hello.
I don't like to
Hi, Matt.
mention the fact I've got a PhD, especially...
Oh, you got a PhD?
Especially not when I got it. My brother didn't have one, even though he was a lecturer in Oxford. But now my brother is actually a professor, and it's really annoying.
It's getting a bit competitive.
So for years I was lauding it over him, and now I have to keep slightly quiet about it because I'm basically 3 ranks down.
Until I keep on bringing it up when you appear on my podcasts.
It's fine. You know, it's a burden I have to bear.
Right, so you have the honour of being our first guest on the show.
Excellent.
You lucky thing.
Setting the template.
Yes, well,
Best practice.
hopefully. Yeah. So we are going to take a trip back to November 23rd, 1963. So Ian, you're going to help us put this into context.
Yeah, a little bit of context. I thought about
Did you kill
doing
JFK?
what I've got for us this week, because there's a lovely guest. So there's 2 of you to talk to. I've prepared a little Unearthly Child quiz. Which is not. Don't worry. It's not really about an unearthly child. It's more about the kind of the events of 1963 and kind of contextualizing, you know, what was going on at the time of the beginning of Doctor Who. It's quite hard, actually. It's all stuff that I'm more interested in than maybe you guys might be. So if the first 5 questions don't work out, there's a really good tie-break question. So we'll put.
Are these all about your family in 1963? Is it one of those quizzes?
This is going to make for thrilling listening.
Take out that one. Don't need that one. Neither of you have heard of my auntie Margaret. Okay. All right then. So it's a very.
Did she kill JFK?
Just question 4 out the window. Okay. So the tie-break question. Right. So question 1. Just shout out. Whoever, if either of you know this, just shout out.
Oh no.
Okay.
Competitive.
Fingers on buzzers. Question 1. Which of these books was not published in 1963? A. Where the Wild Things Are by Maurice Sendak. B. The Spy Who Came In From the Cold by John le Carré. Or C. You Only Live Twice by Ian Fleming.
Beep. A.
Incorrect.
I'd go with the Fleming one, because that's quite a late Bond, isn't it?
Well, you're correct and wrong at the same time there, Matt.
I always am.
That was the book that was not published in 1963 because it was published in 1964.
Oh.
So I was right on both levels.
Well, I don't know when they finished. Didn't he keep writing them till the late 60s? Or
I think so. He got steadily more and more drunk.
Yes,
the quality of the books slipped further and further.
that certainly comes across when you read the canon in order. Yeah. Okay, so question 2.
The opinions of Matt Barber are not necessarily the opinions of this podcast.
Oh, the Bond books.
For legal reasons.
Anyway,
What, are we going to get sued by? Oh, grief. That's question 5 out the window. Right, question 2. In the cinema in 1963 was the James Bond film From Russia with Love. In which year was the first Sean Connery Bond film Dr. No released?
1960.
61?
You're both so wrong, it's laughable.
62?
It was 62, yeah.
Okay. So, can I put it? I was closer. Do I get?
Yeah,
a point
you were less dismal than your competitor.
Excellent.
So
in your face.
That's not hard.
Okay,
I'm not,
right.
I'm not competitive.
No.
Question 3 is the music round. On May the 2nd, 1963, the Beatles reached number 1 in the singles chart for the first time ever. But with which song?
Love Me Do.
Nope.
Hold your hand.
Nope.
I want to hold your hand.
Listeners, this is clearly going to go on for some time.
Is it Besame Mucho?
I suggest you go and put the kettle on and come back.
Is it Please Please Me?
No, it's not that either.
Oh, well.
The answer
Love Me Do.
It's From Me to You.
You
see, you forgot that early classic. Right, this
I like the later
the
stuff.
Beatles had the reverse career as Ian Fleming. They got better as they went along. Ian Fleming got awful as he went along.
Right. Was there a
Although
sort
the
of...
Beatles did get more stoned and like screwed up on drugs,
I was thinking
so
that,
that might be.
Yeah.
Was there a sort of sweet spot in the middle where there was a really good Bond film and a really good Beatles album? I suppose Sgt. Pepper's and...
Revolver, I would say.
Yes. Anyway, we're getting sidetracked, and I like this one because it's a bit rude. Not rude, just because of...
Is this about your Auntie Ethel? Is this one?
I wish you wouldn't keep guessing. Now I've got to make up another question.
Auntie Ethel had quite the summer in 1963. Hocked up on LSD and marijuana. How many?
I don't feel like you're respecting the quiz format. I might dock you a point.
Very, very well said there.
For larking about and tomfoolery. So, question 4. On June the 5th, 1963, a British politician admitted lying to the House of Commons and promptly resigned. He was, of course, John Profumo. But what was his role in government?
Oh, lordy.
He was not Foreign Secretary. Treasury? Secretary of the Treasury? Oh, damn.
Foreign Affairs or something like that? No. Well, affairs of some kind.
That would be... Oh, the irony. He was, in fact, I don't think we have one, probably ever since, Secretary of State for War.
Oh, okay.
What a great job that would be. Especially in peacetime, you just sort of make little models of buses and not really do a lot of work.
Was that the rude question?
Well, it was sort of snarky about the government and the idea that there was an era within sort of living memory where British politicians had enough moral fibre to resign if they were caught lying.
Didn't John Pertwee go to the same parties that Profumo went to?
He did, yeah.
And that's not slander, because I'm pretty sure he admitted it gleefully in moon boots and dinner suits.
I'm sure he did. I bet there's a bit where he sort of turns around and goes, "Profumo, that bounder."
I had a lovely matter.
Even aren't Sally. Final question, anyway, because
there's more.
This is descending into anarchy. One last
Please
question.
let it end now.
What connects the creator of Narnia, Number 35, and the writer of Brave New World?
Is it the name Clive?
No.
Go on.
Staples?
No.
Put us out of our misery, please.
I will tell you. Okay, so the creator of Narnia, C.S. Lewis.
Died of a heart
Number
attack.
Number 35 was JFK. And
Yes,
the
okay,
writer of Brave New World was Aldous Huxley, all of whom died on the 22nd of November 1963.
The problem, Ian, is you said the rioter of Brave New World. So I was thinking that there's a character in Brave New World that's famous for rioting. And I thought, he can't have died in November the 23rd, 1963.
I think he's looking down on you for your Chelmsford accent.
Yeah,
I think you should dock him a point.
I think that's
for
what
that.
it is. I'm right, though, because there was a rioter in Brave New World who was also called Aldous Huxley. He was named for the author of the novel, so I still win. So I think now we know everything about...
You can't win. You gave the quiz.
You're the quiz master.
Yeah, but I've already...
Ian wins the quiz that he conducted.
Oh.
What if Paxman did that every time University Challenge was on?
Right,
and just did a lap of honour around the studio. I win.
This is not going well. I'm going to have to crack out the tie-break question just to restore some kind of peace and get us back on track. So the tie-break question
back on track
for 10 points. Where is the fire that Tsar makes?
In the Cave of Skulls?
Correct.
Oh.
Yes.
I didn't know. Surely Tsar didn't make any fire. Isn't that the point?
I was quoting Old Mother.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Anyway, so that's just to give a bit of background into the kind of broad highlights of what was happening in the pop culture of 1963. But we move forward now to very much the 23rd of November 1963, and a little TV show started.
Yes. Do we want to talk a little bit about how the show came about? Or are we just going to plough straight on into the review?
So it's like cut to 6:30 in the morning tomorrow morning. And Buddy Webber.
Yeah, I mean, the long and short of it really is that they brought in Sidney Newman to shake things up a bit at the drama department, and they wanted a show to fill a gap in the schedule between the sports coverage and Jukebox Jury. And they had already done a couple of surveys about the idea of doing science fiction the year before, and they then embarked on drawing up a paper as to what this idea could be. And one of the things from the previous year's survey was that time travel would be a good way to go.
So it was kind of no single person invented Doctor Who. It was invented by committee. So it's not like Gene Roddenberry magically coming up with an idea. It was literally 4 or 5 people in the committee and gradually boiling down potential science fiction ideas that are suitable for the BBC at the time. And lo and behold, time travel involving a time machine that looks pretty easy to build in the props department on the outside came to the top.
I was watching one of the documentaries, and the first TARDIS prop that they built, they couldn't actually get into the studio because it was too tall to fit into the lift.
Oh yes, yeah, I'd heard that. Because the Lime Grove studio was up one flight of stairs.
Yeah, not helpful.
Oh dear.
So, Verity Lambert is the producer, first female producer at the BBC. You've got director Waris Hussain. So it's quite sort of progressive for... Because I know people think of the swinging 60s, but it's quite early in the 60s. So I think at that time at the BBC, there were still a lot of the old guard still hanging around. So I think it probably did ruffle a few feathers having a Canadian in charge and a man of Asian descent being a director on a new programme.
That was produced by a woman,
And
yeah.
It always struck me that people weren't really looking very closely at what Sidney Newman was doing. And he had this new series, and he could afford to be experimental, particularly with Verity Lambert, who was obviously his protege. But this was sort of a launch pad for her. So he could afford to kind of try her out on it.
Yeah, she'd worked with him at ABC TV on Armchair Theatre, because Rex Tucker was initially installed as the producer, and I think it was explained to him that this young woman would be coming on board and he would be sort of showing her the ropes and guiding her, whereas Verity Lambert was not that kind of person at all. She wanted to take full control and she wasn't going to be told what to do by anyone. So I think Rex Tucker was quite pleased to leave the production. And the reason given was that he couldn't oversee, because he was due to direct the first episode as well, because they'd had to remount it. That got pushed back, so it ended up then going to Waris Hussein.
Thank goodness.
Yes,
Which I
think he does a great job.
We'll get into this, but
yeah,
I think the direction of it is probably one of the strongest parts of An Unearthly Child.
Because this wasn't meant to be the first story either, was it?
No.
So Cyril Weber wrote a story called The Giants, and then after not that long of looking into the scripts, they came to the conclusion that it was going to be too much for them to be able to achieve on the budget they had at that point. So they then swiftly brought forward Anthony Coburn's story to be the first story, and they effectively grafted Cyril Weber's first episode onto his story.
I like how you're calling him Cyril Weber rather than the much more memorable and fun Bunny Weber, which everybody
calls him Bunny because everyone loves El Dorado and remembers the definitive
God.
Bunny.
And script editor was David Whittaker. So a pretty strong lineup, really, when you look at the staff they had on.
I mean, just to take a pause for a second, but it does sound really preposterous that you've got a show designed by committee and made by a bunch of, real outliers at the BBC, and it's, arguably the most successful television show of all time. Maybe that's the secret.
Well, I think that Doctor Who is a series that actually kind of develops itself as it goes along. So I think the first story is great, but it doesn't really become Doctor Who for half a year, and then it sort of beds itself down.
I think what saves this story more than anything is the direction, because the first episode is really exciting and it really draws you in, but in lesser hands I think it could very easily have gone very badly in the stuff set back in the caveman era.
I agree.
So do I.
We'll get into it, I guess. Actually, what we feel about the story. But having said that, so by coincidence, so I haven't watched this for this podcast. I watched this because we were all locked down because of a pandemic, and BritBox is out. And I got BritBox just to see what it was like, because you could get it 30 days for free. And even though I've got all of the DVDs facing me, BritBox has this beautiful sort of array of Doctor images, and just the ability. So last night, to test my Google Chrome, I literally just watched the title sequence to Logopolis, just because I could,
right.
and it just appeared instantly.
I can imagine.
And so I'm faced with all of these Doctors, and I think, well, I haven't seen the pilot episode for ages, since the Lime Grove story showed it on a repeat to commemorate.
I must be a really bad fan, because I missed that. I don't remember.
I
want
to say it was 91, but I could be.
Yeah,
it was around then.
It was back in the time when repeats of Doctor Who was so rare. I think it was before they repeated things like Pyramids of Mars and the Silurians and stuff like that. Yeah. They really hadn't shown any Doctor Who on TV for ages.
It could have. I don't think I saw the pilot until the DVD came out.
Oh, really? Do you want to enjoy? So I think the pilot's worth talking about, actually.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting curio, isn't it?
I think it's brilliant. I think they
I can see why they made the changes that they did.
Yeah, so it's got slips and knocks and fumbles and doors open when they shouldn't. But actually watching it a couple of weeks ago, I didn't really notice that many knocks and fumbles. I mean, Hartnell's always fumbling to the point where it becomes part of his character.
I don't know if they've edited it down for BritBox, but on the DVD you've got a 25-minute version, and then you've got the 35-minute version, which is extra footage there as well, so you can see the TARDIS doors swinging to and fro, and
Really?
various other bits and bobs. Yeah, it's
there's an extra long
it's
version.
comical.
But what it does have is, so the main thing to my mind that they miss out in the actual broadcast version is Susan doing that kind of Rorschach test, the ink blot
Yes,
test.
that's right.
And it's so enigmatic because she sort of draws the hexagon of the TARDIS console
That's right.
over this kind of ink blot, and it's not referred to, and it doesn't actually do anything narrative or in plot terms, but in terms of a kind of prefiguring the kind of the art, the sort of modernist interior of the TARDIS, but also kind of creating this unearthly character for her. She's actually more unearthly in the pilot and weirder. And really, I really like that. I kind of missed that in the broadcast version.
Yeah, she's a bit more of a regular teenager, isn't she, in the broadcast one? And they soften the Doctor as well.
Yeah.
Which I think is probably a wise thing, seeing as this is the first time you're going to be introduced to the character.
I think so. I don't know how much they do.
He's still a prickly character.
He softens his delivery.
Yeah.
But he still kidnaps Ian and Barbara, and you still don't trust him. You don't. I mean, that first story, for people watching it, not knowing that the Doctor's the hero and not knowing that the TARDIS is a safe place. So the TARDIS doesn't become home until, I would say, Marco Polo. And until that point, the TARDIS is a sort of a hostile place. And I think that's actually a sort of a mini arc storyline that threads through these first three stories and reaches a climax with Edge of Destruction.
Yeah.
The TARDIS isn't a domestic space. It isn't a safe space. It's actually a dangerous space. And An Unearthly Child, that one episode, kind of reinforces that. And we've all grown up. Like I mentioned Logopolis earlier. I love Logopolis and Castrovalva because it spends time in the TARDIS, and I feel at home in the TARDIS. I love exploring the kind of the white roundels, corridors, and
the set is beautifully designed.
But to us now, after 50, 60 years of Doctor Who, the set is like a safe space. It's like home. But back then, watching that episode, it's not a horror story, but it's very sinister, and the Doctor is part of that kind of sinister edge to it. You don't trust him, and I don't think you're supposed to trust him.
Waris Hussein wasn't impressed at all with the TARDIS set.
Really?
Yeah, he didn't really see any merit in it at all. But he did sort of come round to say that obviously now it's all these years later, it's come on to be seen as quite iconic. But he wasn't impressed at all.
That's really interesting.
I mean, it's also in the way you film it, I guess.
Yeah.
So he's presented with this set, and I guess, so it's the same as it is today with directors. As I understand it, directors really struggle to film in the TARDIS because, particularly with Jodie Whittaker's team of companions, you've only got so many angles to try and jazz it up a bit and to stop it from looking like An Unearthly Child, looking like it's a proscenium arch with the four characters all facing the camera. So the modern day directors go to great lengths to film with different angles and different corners of the set. And I guess that original set would have been, pretty extensive, but still pretty basic.
Yeah, I think when you consider what the technology they had to work with at the time, I mean, obviously those massive cameras were pretty hefty to try and lug around the studio, and the amount of space they had at Lime Grove, which was tiny apparently, I thought they did a really impressive job, and I think they really brought out the best of the set.
Yeah, absolutely. And also they reduce, obviously, those first few stories use that set to its absolute, and then gradually they reduce it until it's basically just a rounded flat with the console prop. Because the space becomes less and less for it.
I think the fault detector part of the set apparently was an absolute nightmare to put together. So although it looked really nice when it was on screen, I think they soon decided that was surplus to requirements. So that soon was removed. Did you hear about the sets as well? So when they made the pilot episode, Verity Lambert asked for special permission for them to hold onto the sets in case they needed to remount. And it was highly unusual at the time, but she was given that permission. And the guys in charge of the sets obviously didn't take that on board at all, so they trashed all the sets apart from one. So then they had to make them all again from scratch.
Oh my god.
That's exactly what I'd expect from the BBC. that is obviously she makes a request and it goes up to committee A, but there's another 3 committees beyond it, and then it has to come down to the set builders.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time it comes down to the set builders, they decide it's not their job and they strike for 4 years, meaning there's no television. It's the play
Sounds
school
right.
clock all over again. But it is a great set. It is a good set.
Yeah.
I mean, is it Bricard? I can never. I don't think I've ever heard his name out loud. Apart from
Peter Brukacki.
Yes, that's right.
Right.
He's Polish. Apparently.
Right. Okay.
So say it again.
Brukacki.
Brikaki.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Considering it's the one thing he does.
Well, yeah, he apparently fell out with pretty much everyone involved in the making of it, and soon departed. And the new designer that came in, was it Barry Newbury?
Barry Newbury for An Unearthly Child. Yeah.
Yes, I think he wanted Peter Brukacki's name left on the credits for the opening episode because he felt he couldn't really take credit for the TARDIS set.
And that's another thing about those early years is the design. They kind of bat back and forth between Barry Newbury and Ray Cusick, and they managed to give both the strongest stories suited to their particular skills. So imagine if Ray Cusick had had An Unearthly Child, Barry Newbury did the Daleks. Imagine how different Doctor Who would be if it had carried on.
Isn't there a story that Ridley Scott at one point was lined up to design the Daleks and then didn't?
Yeah, and it probably wouldn't have been successful.
Yeah, I mean that's one thing that I do find quite sad. Really, the whole thing with Paul Raymond Cusick did this amazing job designing these creatures and got very little credit in return. But anyway, we'll save that for another episode. Getting back to An Unearthly Child, Ian.
Hello.
What do you think about the principal cast?
I think, well, I mean, as we've touched on, and this is obviously not my personal favourite era. It's not my personal favourite Doctor, and they're not my personal favourite companions, but I'm very much starting out on this journey, coming to it not entirely cold, because as I've said, I've seen a fair few 60 stories, but certainly not enough to have any kind of overall real impressions beyond this kind of introduction. So I am like a very good test subject for the average audience member of 1963. They seem nice. The Doctor seems slightly irascible, a bit scary, a bit, happy with a rock. He could be a bit murdery. Susan, I find, goes from being, as we've said, very sort of mysterious and otherworldly and at times quite alluring, to being a bit of a hysterical, shrieking mess. But I suppose that's just that's range on the part of the actress, if not skill on the part of the writers. I don't know.
I do feel a bit sorry for her because she's taken on this role as this unusual, unearthly child, and it gives a little bit of scope there for something a bit more than the average screaming. Right,
but then by the end of the pilot, she's a very, very earthly child for the rest of her tenure, I imagine. Ask me again when I've seen all of it. Ian and Barbara, Ian just strikes me as a bit of a square, but by 1963 well, yeah, by 1963 standards, I'm sure he was a massive hepcat. But to my child of the 80s eyes, he just appears to be, when he's wanging on about the Honourable Aubrey Waits, you just think, oh God,
bit of a fuddy-duddy.
Yeah.
I love Ian and Barbara, and I can't really imagine one without the other. They are such a double act.
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to watching their relationship kind of progress, and you've come into this episode and you don't know, maybe are they a couple? Are they is there slightly more than they're just two colleagues? And certainly at points of the episode,
they're definitely a couple.
Do you think they're a couple already?
No, actually, no, I don't. I don't think so.
At what point do you think they? I'm not going to use the expression I was about to use.
I think
there is a chemistry there.
Yeah,
I think there's a chemistry there.
I
think they don't get it on until Marco Polo. So that I imagine spending like a month travelling over the Gobi Desert when it's cold at night.
Yeah.
Although they get separate rooms in Marco Polo. So, but by the Romans, they're definitely like, post-coital.
Okay.
Anyway, back to An Unearthly Child.
Pre-coital.
So you've got Derek Newark as Tsar, Alethea Charlton as her, Eileen Way, who I think crops up again a little bit further down the line, spoilers, as Old Mother, Jeremy Young as Cal, and Howard Lang as Horg.
Yes.
So I got distracted, not because Eileen Way crops up later in Creature from the Pits. Is that right, Mark?
Yeah,
it's your era.
She does.
But I'm more distracted by seeing Greg Sutton from Inferno dressed in skins. Oh, is it? Is it the same? Is it the same actor? It is the same actor.
You do have a habit of doing this, Matt. You're like, oh yeah, they were definitely in it, and then it turns out it was somebody else completely.
No, I'm now doing a classic lockdown podcasting of looking up Inferno. God,
so
we don't get casted.
So Mark, while Matt's fiddling with his phone, what do you think of this extended cast of cavemen? How do you take them?
Well, I mean, my first experience of watching this particular story was when they had that collection of stories, the 5 Faces of Doctor Who, which was shown on BBC Two, and that was my first exposure to the first Doctor, and I was really swept up by the first episode.
Yes,
really exciting, but I think as an 8-year-old, I probably found the cavemen stuff a bit dull.
It was hard going, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think Verity Lambert in interviews has said she had reservations about this story being bumped forward to the first one because she did have serious worries about whether that was the right way to go in terms of, presenting a new programme, the first story off the bat. But watching it with adult eyes all these years later, I do find it quite watchable.
News from Wikipedia: Derek Newark is Greg Sutton in Inferno.
Well, that's brilliant. Thanks.
I'm very pleased for you, Matt.
I'll be able to sleep now.
Yeah. Sorry, we'll be talking about something else because I'm quite happy to join back in.
Is that Doctor Who series getting all political again, isn't it? The politics of, I can make fire, no, I can make fire. Don't have him as the leader, have me as the leader.
Well, can I read out something I wrote down as a little observation? It's a story about two very thick men who call each other liars while lying about their ability to provide for the people they hope to lead. It's like some nightmarish flash forward to the first general election in a post-Brexit dystopia. That's basically my review of this story in a nutshell.
Yes, quite prescient, really, isn't it?
So I've got there's a big thing about. So people look at the Daleks, the story after this, and say that it's about the Cold War, it's about nuclear war. Mm-hmm. And then they look at An Unearthly Child and they say, actually, that's about the Cold War and nuclear war as well, because it's about this tribe trying to develop this advanced technology that will completely change the shape of that tribe's future. And it becomes like fire becomes like a cold war between Karl and Tsar. I'm not entirely convinced whether that's slightly stretching it now, having watched it again. I think it's a nice idea, but I think it's kind of much simpler than that.
I think it might work as a metaphor for the kind of automatic gainsaying of the two-party political system, but I don't know you could go much beyond that.
Yeah. But the other thing is, I don't think Verity Lambert's right with my advanced knowledge of this. But I don't think the series would be...
Yeah, what did she know? I mean, she didn't have any successes, did she, as a producer?
No. Let me just give her some advice, even though she's dead now.
I dare you to call her love or toots while you deliver this advice.
Honey. So,
mansplaining with Matt.
I think...
Matsplaining.
Yay! I'm Matsplaining and Matt spreading as well at the same time. Because,
too much information there, Matthew.
Lockdown podcasting, it's all... It's like the 60s. It's all free and easy.
It's all hanging out.
I think it works better with this story opening and the Daleks coming second.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was dangerous because, I mean, retrospectively watched, from the perspective of people who have watched Unicorn and the Wasp and Doomsday and Enlightenment and Kinder, An Unearthly Child looks like the most kind of stagey, flat, pedestrian story, really sort of honed down simple story. But I think at the time, if you're watching it, you have this outlandish episode where something really weird happens, and then for the next 3 weeks you're kind of wanting to know more about the TARDIS. You're kind of wanting to get back in there and find out more about the Doctor and Susan. And those 3 episodes, they do slow the pace down, but they kind of build that mystery, I think. And tension and also character. It's basically putting these 4 characters into a cave, locking them in, and just letting them kind of develop slowly.
I suppose it's also quite successful in showing that, their first experience is being thrown back 100,000 years. You really can go anywhere, and it's quite a. If you think of it in realistic terms, it would be incredibly frightening to feel like you're stuck back in this Stone Age with no escape.
And they also do a really good job at suggesting how traumatic this is. If you look at the characters at the end, the Doctor looks really beaten up.
Yeah,
and
they all look really ready to go.
The TARDIS crew look like they need a good lie down before heading out into Skaro.
I mean, with the exception of Ian Chesterton's hair, which is perfectly immaculate throughout. I mean, Barbara does look sort of really quite haunted by the end of it, and it's interesting because when you watch it 25 minutes a week for a 3-week period, then it probably does feel as if it's building quite slowly. But when I watched it this morning, and I totally wasn't expecting this to happen, but it really did rattle along very quickly indeed. So it feels like they're going from the kind of they don't trust each other of episode 1 to they're put through this ordeal, which, as you say, is quite slow and necessary and kind of ponderous, and it ultimately puts them together as a team of, if not quite yet friends, then certainly they are very close and they are a cohesive team at the end of it. And that's what I think this first story needed to do. I think if, as you were saying, if you'd gone straight into a Dalek story or something else, then the viewer doesn't have any kind of sense of normal to cling to, and the show could just very quickly lose viewers because it's all just unendingly weird. And at least this story is very simple, and you can relate to it to a level.
and also it should be, it's interesting that people wouldn't see these in terms of stories. So all of these had individual episode titles there was no real indication of how long these stories were going to be, I think. So nobody knew that this was a 4-part story. And in fact, it's not a 4-part story. It's a 1-part story, then a 3-part story that leads into the Daleks.
Yes.
But actually, there's no real distinction between this story and the Daleks other than the production team. So you're watching it, and it's just a continuous story. So this is kind of...
And I rather like that.
Yeah, I do. And I think that's how they get away with something like Dalek's Master Plan as well. Because it's not a 12-part story. It's kind of like...
continuation.
Yeah, it's 3 different stories, but blurred together. And that's...
Yeah.
And that I think saves... Treated as 4 episodes, treating An Unearthly Child as 4 episodes has always felt a little bit fake, which is why I quite like the fact that the DVD came out and it was sort of packaged as that kind of run from An Unearthly Child to Edge of Destruction as the kind of the early years or whatever it's called.
The beginning. Yeah.
The beginning. And that kind of packaging makes sense to me. And actually when I'm watching it, that makes sense to me. I wouldn't think of watching An Unearthly Child alone. I'd sort of carry on because of the cliffhanger at the end of the radiation detector going up. I'd kind of carry on watching. And it's only actually by the middle...
nice little lead-in, isn't it?
It's only actually by the middle of the Daleks that I start... Historically, that's my first flag when I'm watching Doctor Who. I just think, well, can't they just get over this big pit? But that's the Daleks. I definitely don't flag during An Unearthly Child. I
was going to say, I think it certainly really fulfills its remit of really getting you interested in the story and wanting to know what's going to happen next. And it's not just that opening story, it's everything about the look of the programme. We haven't talked about the music and the opening titles yet, but that is a huge part of, I'm sure, what drew people into it, because I don't think they would have seen anything quite like that before.
I mean, it's unbelievable. And also, and I've said this before, I wrote a pompous essay years ago.
No.
That I think, well, it's about how you should watch early Doctor Who.
Okay.
And my point is, we spend so long trying to get crystal clear, vid-fired, upscaled copies of these early stories that work on our 40-inch plasma screen TVs, that we can see every detail of everything. And actually, that's not the best way of watching Doctor Who certainly in the early 1960s. So people in the early 1960s would be watching on these kind of tiny tube televisions with kind of really indistinct speakers. And it would be like that title sequence, and also the rest of the story, but that title sequence in particular, it's like your TV would have been haunted. You would see these kind of howl-around shapes and hear this kind of weird electronic noise that's musical, but not like music you would have heard
ever
elsewhere. It's not strings, it's not orchestrated. It's just this weird electronic music coming from your TV. And it's like your TV has suddenly kind of gone on the blink, but in a really artistic way. It's like your TV has actually taken over and started creating music out of itself and creating pictures and imagery out of itself, so that when the title Doctor Who comes up, that's the first kind of solid recognizable shape that actually you see, which is such a I mean, unique is an overused word, but I think it is unique in
you can imagine
television.
the family hearing that theme tune come on in the living room and all rushing in to see what it was.
Yeah, and that continues. So that indistinctness. Imagine looking at the cave set. So one of the plot twists is they put a burning torch inside a skull to try and freak the hell out of Greg Sutton.
Yeah.
And it works. He gets really freaked out. Watching it on my 40-inch brilliant TV in high definition, like BritBox quality, I think, well, that's not all that scary. I don't see what Greg Sutton's got to panic about. Watching it on a tiny...
Yeah, but in 1963 we were that bit nearer to the Stone Age, so I think they could probably relate to that.
But watching it on a tiny TV as well, in poorer quality picture.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
That skull would have looked like a haunting. That's like an M.R. Jamesy sort of weird shape that's recognisably a skull, but a skull that's come alive. So I think you can actually empathise with the cavemen slightly. That this is a really creepy set. This is a really creepy place that these characters are trapped in. Really claustrophobic as well, not just because of the set, but because of the televisions that people were watching it on. So that was my pompous theory, and my conclusion. I'm sure you're clamouring to know what my conclusion was.
Absolutely, yes. We need to know before we embark on the rest of this voyage.
We should all watch 1960s Doctor Who on our iPhones.
Right.
Because it's small, it's distant. Obviously, I don't. Obviously,
you've not spent all that money on a massive 60-inch Crikey Vision TV just to watch Doctor Who on your phone.
But the other reason I don't watch it on my phone and I watch it upscaled quality is because that's the other thing about the way we watch 1960s Doctor Who now, is sometimes we watch it for entertainment and we can make a judgment about how entertaining it was. So it rattles along. It's fun. Yeah. You know, I like the characters' performances. But with that early Doctor Who, because a lot of them are lost, and because we're sort of so immersed in the history.
Don't tell Ian that. He doesn't know that yet.
Sorry. Because some might not be as accessible as others, because Phil Morris is hoarding them.
Oh God! Don't start that again.
because some are lost. The act of watching these is part archaeology as well. So we're watching them with our.
I find it fascinating just to watch as a little bubble of what TV was like back then. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, and historically fascinating. And so you want to watch it in high definition because you want to see the corners of the set. You want to think, well, how did they make that flat? What are the limits of the TARDIS set? Where did this cave set end? How do they block this shot? Where does the Doctor
they do a really good
this?
job. Again, going back to the direction, they do a really good job because Lime Grove, apparently by the time they directed the TARDIS set, when you actually step through the doors, that desert set outside, you could get a maximum of 12 feet, and that was it.
Wow.
I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
All of those stories are unbelievable in the inventiveness of how they give a sense of scale and how they fit, and also they don't make it easy for themselves. So by the time you get to Marco Polo, they get a different setting each week because they strike the sets each week and then rebuild them, which is a kind of blessing. But we're not talking about like Inferno or the Silurians here, where you've got one lab set and you suck every bit of use out of that for 7 weeks. Here, you don't even get the TARDIS set rebuilt each week, so you get a different setting each time. And that's unbelievable. I mean, stupid. I mean, really, the kind of the administrative
schedule in the 60s
organisation of it. Yeah, really dumb. They just didn't think about, well, hang on, maybe we could just have a standing set here.
I don't know if this was the case always, but I have seen a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff where they said they would film it in story order, which could prove problematic. Whereas I think later down the line, I think by the time Troughton had handed in his notice, I think they really did need to shake things up. But anyway,
well, it was that sort of, I suppose, that 6-month gap, and then you have Barry Letts coming in, and he's kind of credited with starting to look at the way these things were put together and filming them in a different way and a different structure. And maybe it was just that thing of they were on such a treadmill for so long that they didn't have the bandwidth to say, no, stop, what are we doing? Why are we doing it this way? And maybe it was just that first 6-month production gap that gave everyone that opportunity.
But also I think they didn't know if it was still going to be made. Like, I suppose they couldn't have the TARDIS as a standing set because it could have gone on for 12 weeks and then they just dropped it.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure you'll discuss when you get to Edge of Destruction. The fact that it is the perfect ending point for Doctor Who. It is actually the conclusion of Doctor Who. and then there's some more after it, like 50 years more.
It's a bit like when Buffy Summers came back and there was a season 6, and you thought, well, we don't need this. You're saying that everything since February 1964 is kind of an unnecessary epilogue.
Well, didn't Alan Moore, famously Alan Moore, said that he likes Doctor Who, but only like Hartnell. So Doctor Who stopped after Hartnell left, and that's one of the more extreme of the hashtag Not My Doctor, Doctor Who is dead moments. That 10th Planet actually is the end of Doctor Who, and it's just not interesting after that.
Well, we'll find out, won't we?
I'm going to cut in. One thing that I've certainly got from this conversation is I am going to watch all of it on my iPhone. Just for that experience, just because I'm more of a story person than a production person, so I'm never looking out for hands holding up bits of scenery in the background. If I can try and get the same kind of experience that the viewers would have had in the 60s, then I'm going to give that a go.
Yeah, just to remind you, it was a pompous essay.
That's fine.
The conclusion of the essay was less important than actually the whole meat of the essay. I stand by the whole television sets were haunted back in the 1960s. I don't stand by the advice of watching it on your iPhone.
No. Is there anything else we want to mention about this story before we wrap it up and give it a score?
Well, I have. So, what do we think of the kind of power struggle between Tsar and Cow?
It's fairly. I mean, I suppose for their personal well-being, it's quite high stakes. But it's
it's not a particularly dramatic part of the story.
No.
It's kind of you don't see a lot of, so they don't in early Doctor Who you normally have kind of a fight.
Yes.
So I'm thinking of the Aztecs famously ends with I don't know, 2 stuntmen having a fight, and you don't get that here. But you're kind of
you do have the fight between Cal and Tsar.
Interminable caveman WrestleMania,
Yeah, it does go on a bit, doesn't it? But
okay, I retract that. You do.
You do.
Is that's yeah.
Yeah. Oh boy.
Well, I think we should give a big shout out to the Radiophonic Workshop. I don't think they got anywhere near the credit they should have had. Devising that tune from Ron Grainer's piece of paper that they were handed is incredible. He had no synthesizers, no computers like we have these days, and they just had to take bits of tape and splice them and cut them and create this incredible piece of music.
And is there a film or a television series in production? I say in production, nothing's in production at the moment. Planned to be in production about Delia Derbyshire.
Oh, I hope so.
Who is the person that did the splicing and the cutting?
Yeah, it was her. There was Dick Mills, Brian Hodgson.
Yeah,
and they really. She was quite guarded about people messing with what she regarded as the perfect version. So as time went on, they wanted little bits added in to match up with the visuals of the new title sequences each time, and I think it really hurt her to have to do that. But I think it's incredible. I think it's a really it stands out as one of the greatest theme tunes of all time.
Yes.
It's a great theme tune, but it's also that the Radiophonic Workshop, so that the sound effects are electronic as well. So the TARDIS sound effect fits in perfectly with that title sequence, and the Daleks, the Dalek heartbeat, and things like that. So this is before Dudley Simpson gets his orchestra involved. Doctor Who is a kind of a testing ground for this kind of weird music and this kind of soundscape, if you like.
Anyway, so let's wrap this up. We're going to give it a score out of 10. I'll come to Matt first, since you're our guest. What would you like to give An Unearthly Child?
Impossible to score it out of 10 without splitting. I mean, the opening episode is definitely a 9 out of 10 for its structure and the build-up and the weirdness and what it does. Then the following 3 episodes are probably a 7 out of 10. But again, as a prelude to the Daleks, that's a pretty strong sort of build up to the Daleks. So, so logically speaking, it's 8 out of 10 for me.
Yeah, I find it very hard to disagree with that, Matt, to be honest. Ian?
If I'm thinking about it in the context of not really knowing too much about what comes next, then I have no reason to suspect that those 3 episodes were really quite hard work. But you're right in that the first episode is a 9 probably, and the next 3 episodes are less so. I think overall I'd probably give it a 6.
That's fine.
Okay.
Monster.
Oh.
I think it'll be interesting when we get to the end of this first series, just to have a look and see how the scores have fluctuated by the time we reach the end of the first season.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Right, so we're going to go to some feedback.
I've got mail.
Okay, well, so the first comment's from David Kitchen of the
Hello, David.
the Australian Doctor Who. Is it, what's it called?
The Doctor Who show. It's quite a tricky one to
Doctor
remember.
Who show.
That.
Yes, that he does with Rob.
Which is a really great show. You should all tune in.
Yep, absolutely. David Kitchen says, a really good 4-part story that takes us from not knowing the TARDIS crew to fear makes companions of us all, and your companion referred to it. Hope, that's right. That's in quotation marks. Now we'd call it a wonderful 4-week mini character arc. The TARDIS set is amazing, and the 4 lead actors are perfect.
Yeah, I can't argue with that.
No. Andy Moore at AMMoore67 says, I remember seeing this for the first time as part of the 5 Faces of Doctor Who season and being entranced by the atmosphere of the first episode and how unsettlingly different this Doctor was. Less so by the remaining 3, but I grew to appreciate them a lot more subsequently. But episode 1 was always going to be a very hard act to follow, which I agree with, and it's pretty much what we've said. And the final comment is from Grant, which is at Cult of Morbius, which is an ostentatious Twitter handle. He says, a groundbreaking piece of television, an amazing piece of science fiction. The cliffhanger to episode 1 is still so sinister and frightening. And
Excellent. Thank you, Grant.
The comments I've been instructed to read out.
Ian, what have you got for us?
So the first comment I have is from Morning Time 2020, who says, it starts off well. The first 10 minutes or so are excellent. The mystery of the strange girl with a shady background is gripping. Then some old guy with a spaceship appears, and after that the next 56 years are just silly. What?
Hashtag Doctor Who is dead.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. Hashtag Philip Morris. So, also a quote from 42 to Doomsday, which I believe is a podcast.
Yes, and another Australian.
Oh, let's see. Interesting. They've got a bit of a monopoly here. So 42 to Doomsday says, episode 1 is still impressive. It would have been easy for the rest of the adventure to be set in the future, but being hurtled back to 100,000 years BC and interacting with primitive man, is cool. Plus the direction is inventive for its day.
Yeah, you can't argue with that.
Ben Ripley says, it's one of the best pilot episodes ever made, albeit twice. The pacing is perfect, and the twists in the plot will keep any first-time viewer glued to the screen. This is how to draw in an audience with a first episode. So, yeah, that's
Excellent.
pretty good. A few more for you. I've got one here from a gentleman called Suki Kark, who is probably well known to listeners of this parish.
Yes.
Loved the first story when I saw it back in the early 80s, but now realise after multiple viewings that I don't much care for the caveman stuff, only the opening episode. I don't think that is the opinion of a massive outlier, if I'm being honest.
No, I think you're probably right.
The Sirens of Audio, which I believe is a podcast.
Another Australian podcast.
Good Lord.
Hi, Dwayne.
Not only is episode 1 one of the greatest pieces of sci-fi ever, it's one of the best pieces of television ever. And finally,
high praise indeed.
These are all great. They've all sort of
They
nailed
are.
it perfectly. So let's finish from me with a quote from the Diddly Dum podcast, which I believe is a podcast.
Yeah, they're not
Just.
Australian.
Oh dear!
Oh, how dare you.
That was Matt who said that.
Yeah.
So if interacting with primitive man wasn't cool, none of us would podcast. We need that connection with our audience.
Are they calling podcast audiences primitive?
They
I just think
yes,
they may
they
be
are.
just a little bit.
That's not
think
playing
that's-
to the room.
That may possibly be Doc's personal sense of humour there. So yeah, any comments, direct them at him at Diddley-Dum. All right, thanks, Ian. And I've got a few here as well. So, Ham-Fisted Bat Vendor. What a fantastic title. This is on Twitter. I viewed the pilot episode last week for the first time in years and still absolutely entranced by it all. Notwithstanding the team's apparent reservations of the production, Hussain's realisation of the episode within the tiny confines of Lime Grove is just outstanding. And I don't think you can really argue with that. Next up, we've got hashtag Never Trust a Tory. At Paul Morris 7777, he says episode 1 is some of the best science fiction ever. Next we have Paul Quinn, and Paul says absolutely superb, not just episode 1, although this is one of the greatest 25 minutes of television ever made. We also have Jed Sweeney, who says I watched episode 1 when it was rebroadcast in the Five Faces season on BBC Two and was awestruck at how good it was. The fact that the Doctor was nothing like the Doctors I had grown up with was irrelevant, as it was an amazing episode. The caveman stuff, meh. Yeah, again, not an outlier. Linton Keneally. Nice name.
That's a fantastic
Keneally.
name.
Yeah. Great story. First Doctor Who episode I ever saw. Oh, well, it's a good one to come in on. Greg Campbell says episode 1, An Unearthly Child, is one of the finest opening episodes for a show that has ever been written. All the performances are top-notch. Television perfection. And we've got one last one from Facebook, which is Jeff Goddard, who, if you've not encountered him on Twitter, he's at the City of Jeff, and he does these really fantastic colorizations and composite pictures of a lot of 60s Who, but he mixes it up with new Who stuff as well. They're really worth checking out. So Jeff says, everyone says how the first episode is then marred by the following 3, but I actually love them. It's got a cracking little cast on the go, and the setting being so hostile and unlike where our primary cast have just come from makes it a true baptism of fire for the 4 of them. Plus, Alethea Charlton rocks. So thank you for that, Jeff. That's brilliant. Thank you all so much for your feedback. I was a little bit cheeky. I put that out on our Nerdology UK Twitter feed because we don't really have our own one up and running just yet. So thank you everyone for giving us your lovely feedback. That's brilliant. If you want to get in touch, we will give a list of all the various ways on our end credits for you. So, thank you to Matt for joining us for this first episode. It's been a real pleasure having you on. Would you like to give us a little plug for anything you've got on the go?
So I'm continuing to record on the Strangers in Space podcast. At the moment, we're very Doctor Who heavy because it means we don't have to prepare so much. But usually we talk about films and TV in general as well. So that's Strangers in Space. My book on the Daemons is still available from the Obverse Books website. Yeah, it's a black archive on the Daemons.
Yeah. From Obverse Books.
From Obverse Books. Beyond that, those are the main things that I've got on. I'm writing a few things at the moment, but I don't think they'll actually be bring me any money. So what's the point in plugging them? They're for charity, so they'll be fine.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, and maybe you'll come back again and we'll chat again.
You're very welcome.
So that was a lot of fun. Thanks for that, Matt. And well, what did you make of that, Ian?
I thought that was brilliant. Not only the story was brilliant, but being lectured to by Dr. Barber was really just. You know, there were so many layers in there that I hadn't really thought about or picked up on. And I know that you've both mocked me openly for this, but I really do like the idea of watching some of these episodes on the iPhone to see them kind of clunky and small. And so you can laugh all you want, but that's what I'm going to do, even if I go cross-eyed.
Well, maybe if you're listening to this, you can let us know how you're planning on watching these. So, well, unless you've got anything else to say, Ian, I think we should wrap it up for this episode and join us next time when we will be taking a trip to the dead planet. If you'd like to get in touch, you can email us at mailbagofrassilon@gmail.com. We're also on Twitter @TimeEndSpacePod. And you can also find us on Facebook. If you want to leave some audio feedback, there is a link in the show notes. You can use your phone or your computer and leave up to 60 seconds of feedback. Or if you're listening via the Anchor website, you can click on the message button and leave your audio. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you to Momo Tempo for providing our theme music.